one of the things that we're going to learn as we read Richard II is that Shakespeare really lays at the feet of Richard, in some senses unjustly, lays at Richard's feet the War of the Roses, which is going to become a major feature of our discussions as we move forward in these plays. War of the Roses after Richard's reign, so not in the play Richard II, but is a civil war that kind of emerges in the power vacuum that Shakespeare portrays Richard as having left. Richard is a kind of capricious tyrant in this play. And that's why I began by talking about this question, what do you do when the ruler is bad, but you believe in the state? In England, the way that this is kind of most dramatized, the sort of most dramatic version of this is to say, well, the king comes from God, right, is ordained by God to rule. And this was a major belief, right? And you have readings of this play, especially in the modern era, which kind of focus on this problem. But it's not just a modern concern. It's really deep in the text, this thing that Richard is kind of a brat. He's sort of arbitrary. He seems to be veering toward tyranny in all sorts of ways that we're going to get into. And he has these loyal followers and friends even, who believe in the crown, but not in him. And they are terribly wrought with uncertainty about what to do, right? In Shakespeare's telling, that is kind of the situation that kicks off the War of the Roses. Because what happens in Richard II, and I give you all sorts of spoilers in these ones because they're history plays, so the point is not what happens, but how it happens, right? In Richard II, we basically have a forced abdication. Henry Bolingbroke, who is Richard's cousin, ends up taking the crown from him. And this is a seismic event, and it will lead to, or it will be followed by, this war between the Lancasters and the Yorks. So the situation is that Richard is the grandson of Edward III, who, remember, was the last king before him. Edward's son, the Black Prince, died, and so it was therefore the crown fell to the inheritor of the oldest son. Edward himself had 7 sons, and so what you have is this grandson of Edward who is ruling among all of these kind of leftover uncles who are very hot-headed themselves, the dukes, right? You have John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, and Edmund of Langley, Duke of York. And these factions are going to become the factions that are going to struggle and fight and do battle for power over England. And all of it, in Shakespeare's view, emerges out of this vacuum, the kind of characterological failings of this man to live up to, admittedly, the incredibly difficult task of being God's anointed, God's representative on earth. And in many ways, this Henriade is an extended meditation on what an incredible burden that is. And we have the legacy of that everywhere around us. This is like a central Western way of thinking about political power, even though we no longer have kings. Nevertheless, we have sacred duties that come to us in the government, and we are fallen humans, and we step into these roles with fear and trembling. And this play is a beautiful depiction of that. Some of the most beautiful and stirring monologues about this conflict, right? The conflict between the real necessity of divinely ordained kings to keep the peace and the order, the chaos that will come if anybody can just rebel and revolt, when they don't like the king, right? That's all defended very eloquently in the play. And yet, nevertheless, this is a terrible king. And how bad does it have to get before things fall apart?